Everyone says they really want positivity in their reviews, but we booktubers know better. You click on Rant Reviews, and this is another Rant Review for a favorite of a lot of people on BookTube, The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. So The Lies of Locke Lamora, I have been looking forward to reading for literal years. I have a lot of friends on BookTube that have recommended it, that love it, that's in their top 10 books of all time. I've read reviews on it, and it sounds very much like something I would like. It's a little more grimy and gritty, but also a fun sort of criminal underworld tale with a heist element and some interesting world building. And I've been so excited. It's been kind of in my back pocket, one of those big books that you haven't read yet, but you know that you'll probably like. And so this Christmas, I was like, hey, I want to read a book that it's just going to be a slam dunk. And so I picked up Lies of Locke Lamora, and let me tell you what, overall I was disappointed. And I will say, if there wasn't so much anticipation for me and other positive reviews, and I had that long history of wanting to read this and being excited to read this, I probably wouldn't do a rant review on it. But I had such high expectations that when especially the third act really fell apart for me, I was just frustrated and annoyed and really mad at this book and wanted to get it out in a video. So this is this video. Let's get into the actual review itself. Now, before getting into any of my negatives, I do want to say there are quite a lot of positives in this book, and I understand why people really like this book. I really do. The writing is good. Scott Lynch is very good about throwing out somewhat frivolous details, or at least they seem that way, but in taken together in concert, it really paints a really beautiful picture. Kind of like an orchestra, you can just listen to one part and it's kind of boring and you're like, why is that violinist just playing that one line over and over again? But then you hear the whole orchestra and it's this, beautiful symphony, literally. I think very much so Lynch writes like that. There are very detailed descriptions of some things, of a carpet or a curtain or this chair and how it looks, or things that could be somewhat frivolous, but altogether I think it paints a really beautiful picture. That's something that actually Robert Jordan does very well at his best. At his worst, obviously Jordan does that too much, which is why there's all those jokes about describing dresses in Wheel of Time. But Scott Lynch, at his best, and this is the only book I've read from him, does that very well. I'll also say this book does flashbacks, the best of any book I've ever read, except for probably The Color Purple, which isn't really flashbacks. It's just telling old tales, but it uses flashbacks tremendously well. It's one of the rare books where the flashback scenes are just as interesting as the, modern or current story that you are reading. And especially in the first act of this book, the first third, a little less than the first third, it is done tremendously well, where we hear about Locke Lamora, the main character, his early childhood, and how he came into this organization called the Gentlemen Bastards, which is this, not really, almost religious, actually not almost, it is a religious organization that bands together these couple of orphans and runts into this found family of thieves who worship, I think, the 13th god, who is this mysterious god who is the patron of thieves and those sort of things. So there's a really cool religious element to why the main characters steal and thieve, and especially a huge character that is incredibly compelling is Father Chains, who is this man who's very wise, who brings together the Gentlemen Bastards and sort of teaches them the way of the world. All of that I found incredibly satisfying, and in the first third of this book, I was thinking, this is great, I'm going to love this, this is just like what everyone said. Because the basic story is, what I just said, the early story of Locke Lamora and how he becomes a Gentleman Bastard. He's I think 8 at the beginning of this book, maybe younger, telling that in flashbacks. And then the modern, or I keep saying modern, but contemporary story is the Gentlemen Bastards as they're all grown up and they're trying to do a poll or do a job against a very rich noble family in this city. And that's kind of how the two things go along parallel, and that is just great. I loved the various ins and outs of the modern pole and this job that they're doing. I thought it was really well done, where like it had that fun sort of like Ocean's 11 feel, where like the criminals were so smart, they always had the upper hand, even when you thought they didn't have the upper hand, and it all made sense, and like a good magic trick. Like, you didn't know what was happening, but when it was revealed, you could appreciate the magic trick even more. I loved that. And then, as I said, the character angle and the really strong characters are grown through the flashbacks. I keep saying Lies because I want to say the whole thing. Locke Lamora, like his character, who he is. Jean, who's like his best friend, who is this chubby but very strong boy who also has a good education because he came from a merchant family, and how they grow to be friends. The two twins, I always forget their names, but like they're mischievous and silly. All of them are very, and then like I said, Father Chains, like all of those characters are so strong. And so you've got this great back and forth of like this very fun plot and these very great character moments. And so it's working really well. I'm loving it. The second half is where things started to become a little harder for me. And this isn't going to be a spoiler review for a little while. It will be, but I'll warn you before then, so I'm still not spoiling things. But in the second half, the story opens up a bit. I won't say why, but it opens up to more citywide politics. And at first I found this intriguing and really interesting. Like, okay, so we've established these characters really well. This poll is very interesting, but now we're getting them into some really hot water. Let's see how they react. And so there's some anticipation building. And at this point, I'm really, really loving it. And it's not till the third act where all of this really fails. And I will say it is everything that worked in the first part of the book suddenly fell apart in the latter half. And I'm going to talk specifics in the spoiler section, so I'm going to end here as far as a review of the book, but I do think a lot of the promises, a lot of the story basics, a lot of the character basics break down to a very detrimental degree in the third act, which is why at the end of the day, I'm going to give this a if you like X recommendation. And that X that I'm saying, if you like sort of fun popcorn reads, I think this is still a very fun popcorn read. However, don't look too closely at a lot of stuff. I went into this thinking it was going to be one of my favorite ever, so I was really enveloping myself, really getting attached, really like pushing myself. And I think that's why it really let me down at the end of the book. But if you like sort of popcorn books, I don't mean that in a negative way, but like just really like want something that's really fun and kind of silly at times. Like if you think about this book in that way, I think it's a good read. You will like that. Trying to think of some other like parallel books to this, like some of the early Dresden books or the Lightbringer series, some of the more lighthearted Sanderson stuff, like Warbreaker or Elantris, like those kind of like page turners that aren't necessarily like incredibly deep on a theme level or anything like that, but like are fun to read. That's where I would put this, and I think the reason I didn't like it as much is because in my head it wasn't like that. So my main struggle I'm going to talk about in the spoiler section, which we're going to start right now. Okay, spoiler free, I can talk about this stuff now. For me, this book completely falls apart because of one main element that is incredibly important, and that is the Bonds Mage. And I'm going to talk much more detailed in a second, but before I did that, I wanted to talk about something that Sanderson talks a lot about that I don't actually necessarily agree with wholeheartedly, but if you've watched Brandon Sanderson's lectures that he's posted online, he talks a lot about how a author makes a promise to the reader, makes a promise with the genre, makes a promise with how they talk about things, about what they reveal, what they show you, and while I don't take it as far as he does, I do think that's true, that books bring expectations to readers, and sometimes it's good to subvert expectations, but sometimes it's done to where it really undermines everything that happened in the book and will leave the reader with a bad taste. And that is exactly what happened for me with Lies of Locke Lamora because of the Bonds Mage. The first third of this book promises to be a fantastic character story with the boys who become the gentlemen bastards, but also a criminal or heist or adventure novel that makes sense, because that's one of the things about heist movies and these fun criminal movies, again, like an Ocean's 11 or Italian Job, or whatever we want to say, like the watcher wants to be on the edge of their seat, or the reader or the listener, whatever it is, edge of their seat, but it needs to fit in the context of the series. It's very much like a mystery. The heist has to all fit together because that's satisfying. That's why you're watching the movie. And that's why I think the Bonds Mage hurts this so badly, because it doesn't fit in the world that was painted throughout the rest of the series. So first of all, let's talk about the Grey King and his scheme. His whole scheme and the success that it has is completely reliant on the Bonds Mage and his magic. But I have several problems with this. And my first and overarching problem is why a single Bonds Mage is able to do so much damage in this city. If Bonds Mages really, this is just a huge failing to me in the area of world building. If Bonds Mages truly existed as they exist in the book as it's told, so many things about the world would be different. And this plot would be different, because no self-respecting Lord of the Underworld would not have a Bonds Mage in his employ. And I know I'll get to expense later, but I'm forgetting his name, but the Lord of Everything, whose family is all killed, the Lord of the Underworld, Don Salvaro, is that his name? I can't quite remember, but if he is as rich and as powerful and as successful, why does he not have a Bonds Mage on his team, or under his employ, that's just always there? Because otherwise, anyone who would have a Bonds Mage would be able to do exactly what happened in this book, which is steadily take out all of his people, because no one can fight against Bonds Mages, and then ultimately take him out. Other than having a Bonds Mage, the only other thing that this brother and sister duo did was become good fighters and become bodyguards for him. That's it. Otherwise, it has to be the Bonds Mage for this to make any sense at all. So frustrating. Okay, and maybe you say, okay, he's a criminal, they'd get in trouble if he had it, blah, blah, blah. Why doesn't the prince of this city, or the count, I forget exactly what, Duke, there's a Duke. Why doesn't the Duke have any Bonds Mages in his employ? He can afford it, for sure. He doesn't recognize that there's magery being done. This wouldn't be nervous with him. No one would recognize the Bonds Mage at his big event every year. The part of the Bonds Mage is also no one's escaped with their information, or it hasn't leaked. The criminal underworld would be trying to do that all the time. There's just so many questions with this all-powerful Bonds Mage or organization that just doesn't work. And the entire plot is reliant on this Bonds Mage, because if he can't do that, the Grey King doesn't do anything, and the rest of the book just takes place as normal. But because he has this Bonds Mage, he's able to get Locke Lamora to do this crazy thing and pretend to be him. He's able to hurt Jean, neutralize everything, because he's the Bonds Mage. And let's talk about expense, because the first thing I know a lot of people are going to say to you, and this is the only thing the book says about why Bonds Mages aren't everywhere, is because they're so expensive. Oh, this guy couldn't, have a Bonds Mage for this long a time. They're way too expensive. But then at the end of the book, they tell us that the payment to the Bonds Mage is just the money that Locke Lamora and his gang had in their secret hideout. Which is a lot of money, but not an unfathomable amount of money for the higher echelons of society, like a duke or the Lord of the Underworld. They could very easily make it have a constant retainer at the cost that is even stated in the book. So this doesn't make sense. And so it's this is stupid. This Bonds Mage is supposed to do everything just because this one guy has enough money, like Locke Lamora has enough money. Maybe I misread something totally along the line, but there doesn't seem to be any reason why there isn't another Bonds Mage out and about. Because even the stated expense is not as high as you would think it would be. Even high-powered merchants would hire Bonds Mages to protect their, their goods or whatever. They would be a much more prevalent part of society. And some people might, I haven't read the rest of the series, so some people might say, oh, in later books they will explain this. But I read this book, I finished this book, and there wasn't enough explanations for me to want to go further. Like, you can't retcon something that doesn't make sense. So frustrating. Also, let's talk about the ultimate reason why the Bonds Mage is defeated in this book is because Locke Lamora is not Locke's real name. I forget what they actually said his name was at one point, but he tries to get Locke to do something, and apparently names have power. It's never totally, like, described, but, like, the Bonds Mage is able to, like, manipulate Jean because he has Jean's real name, but can't manipulate Locke because Locke Lamora is not his last name. This is also ridiculous because if this was true that you would just need, like, a fake name, everyone, maybe not like dukes or whatever, but like everyone in the criminal underworld would have a fake name, like that they would just go by, and they just decided that was their name because they don't want a Bonds Mage to have that much influence over them. Like, everybody that would be a common practice, because it's not like Locke is not, like, his identity is Locke Lamora, like, you know, because in some books it's like, you know, their names have changed and names change who a person is, so it might, like, cheat if they, like, just changed their name but then that was their name anyway, because that's what Locke is, but it still doesn't have the power up. So everyone could just have a name they were given at birth, and then very secretly they would have their, like, adult name or their, like, you know, thief name, and then, like, a Bonds Mage, like, can still do some stuff to them but not all of them. My tattoo is bleeding because I'm angrily scratching at it while I think about this book. So for the last, I don't know, 150, 200 pages, all during what's supposed to be the climax, I'm just like, there's got to be something else underneath this that makes this possible, and it doesn't. There's no explanation for why all the secrets that Locke had are known by the Bonds Mage, like, down to their secret hideout, their identities, their, like, how they have so much money. Like, there's no description of why they would know that, because the Bonds Mage doesn't have, like, omniscience, but they just do. And then at the very end of the book, when the reveal is supposed to come that maybe we'll bring this all together, it's like, it's a silly revenge plot where this guy, for the secret piece, his parents were killed, like, which is tragic and obviously would create a revenge line, but, like, this guy wouldn't become all powerful. He just became, like, a buccaneer somewhere and a pirate. But, like, he's able to pull all this off, and it's not even something connected to something we've heard before. The only vague connection to something that has been read in this book before is that there is a secret piece. It was not like someone who knew Jean or one of the boys, you know, during one of the plague outbreaks or anything like that. It was just like this random person. There was no good reveal. So I was already frustrated, and that reveal was like, ugh, the end of it. So I am not going to be reading the rest of this series because I'm not drawn to it. There's other series I want to draw more, or I want to read more that I think has done better than this. So let me know in the comments if I'm way off on this. You're probably not going to convince me, but hey, I'll listen. As I said before, like a 2-star read if you like X kind of read. It's a fun popcorn book, but, like, I don't think there's a whole lot of depth there, even though there's some things that I really liked. So that's my experience of Lies of Locke Lamora. I'm so sorry. Let's talk in the comments or my Discord more. As always, first in, last out.